The dusty road is usually where a cowboy finds his peace, a ribbon of dirt stretching out toward a horizon that promises nothing but freedom and the slow setting of the sun. It is the image that built a legend, the place where the songs are born and where the heart of Texas beats the loudest. But tonight that dusty road was a million miles away, replaced by the slick, unforgiving asphalt of downtown San Antonio. The dust had turned to a slush of gray ice and mud, churned up by the tires of luxury sedans and delivery trucks rushing against the clock. It was Christmas Eve, and the world was not quiet. The world was screaming with the frantic energy of last-minute consumption, a neon-lit chaos that seemed to have forgotten the silence of the manger or the stillness of the stars. Inside the cabin of the black heavy-duty pickup truck, the air was warm and smelled faintly of expensive leather and Norma's perfume, a scent that had been George's anchor for over half a century. The king of country sat behind the wheel, his hands resting lightly at the 10-2 positions. Those hands, which had strummed a million chords and shaken a million other hands, looked tired tonight. The knuckles were a little more prominent, the skin a little more weathered, mapping the geography of a life spent in the spotlight and on the ranch. He adjusted the brim of his resistal hat, pulling it lower as if to shield his eyes, not just from the glare of the traffic lights, but from the overwhelming noise of the modern world outside. The heater hummed a low, steady note, a bass line to the silence that sat between him and his wife. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the companionable quiet of two people who knew each other's thoughts before they were spoken. They were returning from a gala, a high society event filled with donors and politicians, the kind of evening that required George to be the legend, not the man. He was exhausted. He wanted nothing more than to trade the tuxedo jacket for a flannel shirt and the city lights for the darkness of the ranch. Norma sat beside him, looking out the passenger window. The condensation was fogging up the glass, blurring the world outside into streaks of red and green light. She wiped a circle on the pane with her gloved hand, her eyes scanning the sidewalk. The Pearl District was alive, throbbing with wealth. Beautifully dressed couples walked arm in arm, laughing, their breath puffing out in white clouds. Storefronts glittered with diamonds and designer clothes, promising happiness in exchange for a credit card swipe. It was a scene of American prosperity, a postcard of the Texas dream. But Norma was not looking at the lights. She was looking into the shadows between them. She had always possessed a vision that George admired, a way of seeing the cracks in the pavement that others stepped over. The truck idled at a red light, the engine purring with a restrained power that vibrated through the floorboards. The light cycle here was long, designed to let the pedestrians cross, a parade of privilege marching through the slush. George tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, humming a melody that didn't exist yet, just a fragment of a tune trying to find its way out. He glanced at the dashboard clock. It was nearly 11. By the time they got back to the property, it would be Christmas morning. He was about to make a comment about the traffic, a gentle complaint about how San Antonio had grown too big for its britches, when he felt Norma's hand grip his forearm. Her grip was tight, urgent. It wasn't a touch of affection, it was a signal. The humming stopped. George turned his head, following her gaze through the cleared circle on the passenger window. "George, look." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the cabin like a gunshot. George leaned forward, squinting through the tint of the windshield. At first, he saw nothing but the blur of coats and shopping bags. Then, the crowd parted for a brief second, like the Red Sea allowing a glimpse of the ocean floor. There, on a wrought-iron bench that looked as cold as a tombstone, sat an anomaly. It was a girl. She could not have been more than 7 years old. In a sea of wool coats and cashmere scarves, she was wearing a denim jacket that was 2 sizes too small and worn thin at the elbows. She had no hat. Her hair, a tangled mess of light brown curls, was matted with melting snowflakes. She wasn't moving. She wasn't begging. She wasn't crying. She was just sitting there, clutching a dirty pink backpack to her chest, as if it contained the crown jewels of England. The light turned green. Behind them a horn honked. It was the sharp, impatient blast of a luxury SUV demanding the king of country move out of the way so they could get to their warm homes. George didn't move. He didn't even check the rearview mirror. He stared at the girl. A group of teenagers, loud and boisterous, walked past the bench. One of them, distracted by his phone, bumped into the girl's shoulder. She rocked sideways, nearly falling off the slick metal seat. The teenager didn't stop. He didn't look back. He just kept laughing at something on his screen, leaving the girl to right herself. She did so slowly, with a terrifying resignation. She didn't look angry. She looked like she expected it. She looked like she apologized to the air for existing in his path. That small movement, that acceptance of invisibility, broke something inside George Strait. It was a crack in the armor of the superstar, allowing the grandfather and the cowboy to step through. He put the truck in park. The transmission clunked, a sound of finality. He hit the hazard lights, the rhythmic clicking filling the cabin. The horns behind them multiplied, a chorus of indignation. George ignored them all. He looked at Norma. Her eyes were already wet, shimmering with a mixture of heartbreak and fury. She didn't have to say a word. She reached for the door handle at the same moment he did. George stepped out into the biting cold. The wind hit him instantly, cutting through his suit, but he didn't feel it. His boots hit the pavement with a heavy, authoritative thud. He adjusted his hat, pulling the brim down tight against the wind. He walked around the front of the truck, his presence commanding despite the chaos. People who were honking saw the silhouette of the cowboy hat, the distinct walk, and the noise died down, replaced by confused whispers. But George wasn't walking toward the fans. He was walking toward the bench. As he approached, the reality of the situation became sharper, more painful. The girl was shivering so violently that her teeth were chattering, a sound that was audible even over the street noise. Her legs, clad in jeans that were too short, were exposed to the freezing mist. She was staring at her sneakers, which were canvas, soaked through and utterly useless against the Texas winter. George stopped a few feet away. He knew that a large man looming over a frightened child could be terrifying. He slowly lowered himself, ignoring the slush that soaked instantly into the knees of his expensive dress slacks. He went down on one knee, bringing himself to her eye level. "Hey there, darling." His voice was the voice that had sold millions of records, deep, resonant, and wrapped in a honeyed warmth that felt like home. But the girl flinched. She pulled the backpack tighter, her knuckles white. She looked up, and George felt his heart stop for a second. Her eyes were wide, blue, and filled with a terror that no child should ever know. It wasn't just fear of the cold, it was fear of the world. She looked at him, then looked past him, scanning the street as if expecting a monster to emerge from the shadows. Norma was there a second later. She moved differently than George. She moved with the instinct of a mother, a grandmother. She didn't hesitate. She knelt beside George, disregarding her gown, and leaned in close, but not too close. "Honey, you're freezing. Where are your folks?" The girl looked between them. She saw the kind eyes of the man in the hat and the gentle face of the woman with the soft voice. She tried to speak, but her jaw was locked from the cold. She took a ragged breath, a cloud of steam escaping her lips. Mama said, wait here." The words were broken, fractured by the shivers. George exchanged a look with Norma. It was a look of dread. "When did Mama say that, sweetheart?" George asked, keeping his voice low and steady. The girl looked at the clock tower across the street, then back at her hands. When the sun was up, she went to get help. She said she'd be right back. The sun had set 5 hours ago. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since then. This child had been sitting on a block of ice for half a day, watching the world pass her by, waiting for a salvation that hadn't come. George felt a surge of anger, hot and righteous, burn in his chest. It wasn't anger at the mother. He didn't know her story yet, but anger at the hundreds of people who had walked past this bench. Anger at the city. Anger at the darkness. "We need to get her warm," Norma said, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. She stood up and immediately began to unbutton her coat. It was a heavy, luxurious wool coat, lined with silk. She slipped it off, leaving herself exposed to the biting wind in her evening gown. She wrapped the coat around the girl. The garment swallowed the small child, the sleeves hanging down past her hands, the hem pooling on the dirty concrete. The girl stopped shivering for a second, stunned by the sudden weight and warmth. She touched the fabric with awe, as if she were touching a cloud. George stood up, his knees cracking slightly. He scanned the street. He took out his phone. He needed to do this right. He was George Strait, but he was also a citizen. There were laws, there were protocols. He dialed the local precinct's non-emergency line, a number he had in his contacts because of his work with the Badge Association. He expected a quick answer. He expected a patrol car in 3 minutes. The phone rang and rang and rang. Finally, a harried dispatcher picked up. "Bexar County Dispatch, please hold." The line clicked to elevator music. George stared at the phone in disbelief. He looked down at Lily. She had whispered her name to Norma while he was dialing. Norma was rubbing the girl's back, whispering assurances. The music on the phone looped. Jingle bells. The irony was bitter. Finally, the voice returned. "Dispatch, what is your emergency?" "This isn't an emergency yet, but it's about to be," George said, his voice clipped. "I'm downtown, Pearl District. I have a found child, abandoned. She's been here for hours. I need an officer and a social worker." "Sir, it's Christmas Eve," the dispatcher sighed, the sound of papers shuffling in the background. "We have a 10-car pileup on I-35 and domestic disturbances in every other sector. Unless the child is injured or in immediate danger, we can't send a unit right now. Is she injured?" "She's freezing to death," George snapped, his patience fraying. "She's 7 years old. She's alone." "Look, sir, if you can transport her, the only shelter with intake open tonight is the municipal gymnasium on the west side. But I have to warn you, it's at capacity. They're sleeping on mats in the hallway. CPS is skeleton crew until Tuesday. If you leave her there, she'll be processed, but it's not a good night to be in the system." George looked at the gymnasium in his mind. He knew the place. It was a concrete box, echoing, smelling of bleach and despair. He looked at Lily. She was buried in Norma's coat, her eyes drooping with the onset of hypothermia-induced sleepiness. She looked like an angel that had fallen into a mud puddle. He imagined leaving her on a cot in a hallway, surrounded by strangers, while he went home to his warm ranch, his fireplace, his family. The thought made him physically ill. It went against everything he stood for. It went against the code of the cowboy, the code of the Christian, the code of a man. "I'm not taking her to a gym," George said into the phone. "Then you can wait there, sir. ETA for a unit is maybe 4 hours." George hung up. He didn't say goodbye. He shoved the phone into his pocket. He looked at the hotel entrance across the street. The Hotel Emma. 5 stars. Doormen in uniform. He could rent a room. But a single man, even George Strait, checking into a hotel with a random child? That would raise questions he didn't want to answer tonight. And besides, a hotel room wasn't a home. A hotel room was just a nicer cage. He looked at Norma. She was already looking at him. She had heard the tone of his voice. She knew what the dispatcher had said without hearing the words. She stood up, pulling the giant coat tighter around Lily's shoulders. "They aren't coming, are they?" Norma asked. "Not anytime soon, and if they do, they're taking her to the overflow shelter." Norma's eyes hardened. It was a look George had seen a few times in their marriage. It was the look she had when she defended her family, when she made a decision that was non-negotiable. She looked down at Lily, then up at George. The snowflakes were catching in her eyelashes. "No," she said. George waited. "She is not going to a shelter on Christmas Eve, not while we have a house with 12 empty bedrooms and a refrigerator full of food. We are not leaving her here, George. It's kidnapping, technically, Norma. If we take her without police authorization..." George played devil's advocate, though his heart was already racing with the same decision. "Let them arrest me," Norma said, lifting her chin. "Let them put it in the papers. Norma Strait arrested for giving a freezing child a bed on Christmas. I dare them." George felt a smile tug at the corner of his mouth. This was the woman he loved. This was the fire that had kept him warm all these years. He looked at Lily. "Lily?" George asked softly. The girl looked up from the folds of the coat. "You hungry?" She nodded, a small, jerky movement. "You like burgers?" She nodded again, her eyes widening slightly. "Well, my wife here says she's tired of this cold. We're going to go for a ride, we're going to get some food, and then we're going to find a place for you to sleep that isn't a bench. Is that all right with you?" Lily hesitated. She looked at the street where her mother had disappeared. "But Mama..." "We'll leave a note," Norma said quickly, reaching into her purse for a pen and a notepad she always carried. "We'll leave it right here, taped to the bench. If she comes back, she'll know you're safe. We'll leave my number." Norma scribbled furiously. She didn't write George straight. She wrote Norma and her personal cell number. She taped the note to the cold metal of the bench using a band-aid she found in her purse, sticking it aggressively so the wind wouldn't take it. "Come on, honey." George reached out his hand. He didn't grab her, he offered it. A large, calloused hand, palm up. A hand that had held reins and microphones and grandchildren. Lily looked at the hand. Then she looked at the dark street. Then she looked at Norma's encouraging face. Slowly, tentatively, she reached out her small, cold hand and placed it in George's. His fingers closed around hers gently, engulfing them in warmth. They walked to the truck. George opened the back door. It was a crew cab, spacious and clean. He lifted her up, her muddy sneakers hovering over the pristine upholstery. He didn't care. He buckled her in. Norma climbed into the passenger seat, shivering now without her coat but smiling. George got behind the wheel. He looked at the dashboard. The temperature gauge read 32 degrees. He cranked the heat up to high. As he pulled the truck away from the curb, merging back into the flow of traffic, he looked in the rearview mirror. Lily was looking out the window, watching the bench disappear. Then she turned her head and looked at the back of George's head. "Mister?" she asked, her voice gaining a little strength as the warmth of the truck hit her. "Yes, Lily? Are you one of Santa's drivers? You have the hat." George chuckled, a deep rumble in his chest. He caught Norma's eye. She was beaming. "No, sweetheart, I'm not with Santa. I'm just a guy who sings songs. But tonight we're on a special mission." He steered the truck toward the highway, away from the city lights, toward the dark, open country. The dusty road was calling, even if it was covered in snow. They stopped at a Whataburger on the outskirts of town. It was the only thing open. George Strait, the legend, walked up to the window because the lobby was closed. The teenager at the window dropped the bag of fries when he saw who was standing there, snow gathering on the brim of his Stetson. George just winked, put a $100 bill in the jar, and took the tray of burgers. Back in the truck, the smell of grease and onions filled the air, better than any gourmet dinner they had been served at the gala. Lily ate with a ferocity that broke their hearts. She ate like she hadn't seen food in days. She wiped ketchup off her face with the sleeve of Norma's $3,000 coat. Norma didn't blink. She just handed her a napkin. As they drove deeper into the darkness of the Texas hill country, the tension of the city began to fade, replaced by the heavy silence of the rural night. But a new tension was building in George's mind. He knew the law. He knew that by taking this child, he had crossed a line. He was protecting her, yes, but to the system he was a complication. He knew that when the sun came up on Christmas morning, the real world would come crashing back in. But for now, in the cocoon of the truck, with the headlights cutting a path through the falling snow, they were safe. Norma reached across the center console and took George's hand. She squeezed it. "We're doing the right thing," she whispered. "I know," George said, his eyes on the road. "I just hope the rest of the world understands that when morning comes." The ranch gate appeared in the headlights, the familiar archway that marked the boundary of their sanctuary. George punched in the code. The gates swung open. They were home, but they had brought the storm with them, and tomorrow they would have to weather it. The tires crunching over the gravel of the driveway sounded different here. In the city, the noise was harsh, a grinding of stone against pavement. But on the ranch, it was a welcoming sound, a signal to the coyotes and the jackrabbits that the master of the house had returned. The headlights of the truck swept across the front of the main house, illuminating the limestone walls and the massive oak beams that held up the porch roof. It wasn't a palace of glitz. It was a fortress of tradition. The house stood low and wide, hugging the earth, built to withstand the Texas heat and the sudden violent storms of the plains. Tonight, covered in a thin, rare blanket of snow, it looked like a painting from a century ago. George killed the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. No sirens, no honking, no hum of the city grid. Just the wind whistling through the mesquite trees and the distant lowing of a cow in the winter pasture. He turned to look at the back seat. Lily had fallen asleep, her head lolling against the window, her mouth slightly open. She still clutched the greasy paper bag from the burger joint as if it were a treasure chest. Norma unbuckled her seatbelt, her movements soft and deliberate. She turned to George, her face illuminated only by the dashboard lights. "Carry her in, George. Don't wake her if you can help it." George nodded. He stepped out into the crisp air, the snow crunching under his boots. He opened the back door and leaned in. The smell of the child, a mix of old rain, cheap fast food, and the distinct, sharp scent of poverty, hit him. It was a smell he hadn't encountered in his own home for a very long time. He slid his arms under her, one beneath her knees, the other supporting her back. She was impossibly light. It felt like lifting a bundle of dry sticks. As he pulled her against his chest, she stirred, whimpering something unintelligible, her small hand instinctively grabbing the lapel of his suit jacket. She buried her face in the expensive fabric, seeking heat. They walked up the steps to the front door. Norma unlocked it, pushing the heavy wood open. Warmth rushed out to greet them, smelling of cedar logs, leather, and the faint lingering aroma of cinnamon from the morning's coffee. George carried Lily through the foyer, past the walls lined with platinum records and awards that meant nothing to the girl in his arms. He carried her into the living room, where the embers of the fire were still glowing red in the massive stone hearth. "Put her on the sofa for a moment," Norma whispered, already moving toward the linen closet. "I need to get the guest room ready, the blue room. It's the warmest." George laid her down on the distressed leather sofa. He grabbed a throw blanket made of alpaca wool and tucked it around her. He stood there for a moment, watching her sleep. In the light of the fire, he saw the details he had missed in the dark street. The dark circles under her eyes, the way her skin was chapped and raw on her cheeks, the dirt under her fingernails that wasn't just from today, but from weeks of living hard. He took off his cowboy hat and placed it on the coffee table. He ran a hand through his hair, letting out a long, heavy sigh. He felt a weight on his soul that had nothing to do with his age. It was the weight of responsibility. Norma returned with fresh towels and a pair of flannel pajamas that had belonged to one of their granddaughters years ago. She looked at George, her eyes scanning his face. "She needs a bath, George. She's chilled to the bone, and—" Norma hesitated, her voice catching. "I saw marks on her arms when I put the coat on her, old bruises, scratches." George's jaw tightened. "From the mother?" "I don't know," Norma said, shaking her head. "Or from the streets, or from the system she's been running from, but we aren't asking her tonight. Tonight, she just needs to feel safe." The next hour was a blur of domestic tenderness that felt foreign yet familiar. George built up the fire while Norma woke Lily gently. The girl was terrified at first, waking up in a strange, massive room with high ceilings and animal heads mounted on the walls. But Norma's voice was a balm. She led Lily to the bathroom. George stayed in the living room, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. He didn't drink it immediately. He just held the glass, listening to the water running and the murmur of Norma's voice. He heard the splash of water, and then, heartbreakingly, he heard Lily ask, "Is the water warm? Really?" "As warm as you want it, honey," Norma's voice drifted out. When they finally emerged, Lily looked like a different child. She was scrubbed clean, her hair combed out and damp, wearing oversized flannel pajamas with cartoon horses on them. She looked younger, softer, but her eyes were still vigilant. She walked into the living room and stopped when she saw George. He was sitting in his armchair, the glass of whiskey on the side table, his guitar resting on his knee. He wasn't playing a song. He was just plucking the strings, letting the wood resonate. "Feeling better?" George asked, not stopping his playing. Lily nodded. She looked at the fire. "Is this your house?" "Yep," George said. "It's the ranch." "It's big," she whispered. "Bigger than the shelter." "It's just a house," George said. "Walls and a roof. Come here, sit by the fire. You need to dry that hair." She sat on the rug, close to the flames, but far enough from George to keep a safe distance. Norma came in with a mug of hot chocolate. Real hot chocolate, made with milk and melted shavings, not the powder from a packet. Lily took it with both hands, the steam rising into her face. "Tomorrow is Christmas," Lily said suddenly, staring into the mug. "That it is," George said. "Santa doesn't know I'm here," she said, her voice flat, stating a fact rather than a complaint. "He goes to my old house, or the bench. He won't find me here." George stopped strumming. He leaned forward, the leather of his chair creaking. "Darling, let me tell you something about Santa," George said, his voice dropping to that storytelling register that could captivate a stadium. "He has a GPS that's better than anything the military has, but more importantly, he knows where the good hearts are. And my wife, well, she has a direct line. I think he knows exactly where you are." Lily looked at him, skepticism warring with hope. She took a sip of the chocolate. "Okay." They put her to bed in the blue room, under a down comforter thick enough to withstand an Arctic winter. Norma left the door slightly ajar and turned on a nightlight. When she came back to the living room, George was standing by the window, looking out at the snowy driveway. "She's out like a light," Norma said, wrapping her arms around her waist. "We have a problem, Norma," George said, not turning around. "I know. The police, CPS. When they find out—" "Let them find out," Norma interrupted, walking over to stand beside him. "George, did you see her back when I helped her into the tub?" George turned to look at his wife. "What?" "She's thin, George, ribs showing thin, and there are scars, not fresh ones, old ones. Someone hurt that baby a long time ago. If we had left her on that bench, or sent her to that gymnasium, she would have disappeared, swallowed up. I couldn't live with that." "Could you?" "No," George said softly. "No, I couldn't." "Then we fight," Norma said. "We have lawyers, we have money, we have a reputation. For once, let's use the King of Country title for something other than getting a good table at a restaurant. Let's use it to keep the wolves away." George smiled, a tired, crooked smile. He kissed Norma on the forehead. "You're a dangerous woman, Norma Straight." "I'm a grandmother," she replied. "That's worse." The sun rose on Christmas morning with a brilliance that blinded. The snow on the Texas hills reflected the light, turning the ranch into a landscape of diamonds. Inside the house, the smell of bacon, biscuits, and sausage gravy permeated every corner. It was the smell of a cowboy breakfast, heavy and comforting. Lily woke up confused. For a moment, she thought she was back in the motel room they had stayed in last week, or the car they had slept in before that. But the bed was too soft, the air too warm. She sat up. The door creaked open. "Merry Christmas!" It wasn't George or Norma. It was a golden retriever, Bubba, pushing the door open with his nose. The dog trotted in, tail wagging, and rested his chin on the mattress, staring at Lily with soulful brown eyes. Lily froze, then slowly reached out a hand. The dog licked her fingers. A giggle, rusty and unused, escaped her throat. She walked into the kitchen, followed by the dog. The table was set. Not a fancy setting, but a family one. George was at the stove, wearing an apron over his flannel shirt, flipping pancakes. Norma was pouring orange juice. "Morning, sleepyhead," George boomed. "Hungry?" Lily stared at the table. There was so much food. Eggs, bacon, fruit, pastries. She sat down tentatively. Is someone else coming?" she asked. "Just us," Norma said, placing a plate in front of her. "Eat up, we have a big day." After breakfast, they went to the living room. The tree, a 12-foot pine cut from their own land, was decorated with ornaments collected over 40 years of marriage. Underneath it, where the night before there had been perfectly wrapped gifts for cousins and grandkids who were visiting later in the week, there was now a pile of hastily wrapped packages with Lily written on them in Sharpie. Norma had raided her emergency gift closet. She had found a scarf, a pair of leather gloves, a sketchbook, colored pencils, and a stuffed horse from the ranch's gift shop inventory. It wasn't an iPad or a drone. It was simple stuff. Lily sat on the floor, staring at the pile. "Go on," George urged, sipping his coffee. "They won't open themselves." She opened the sketchbook first. She ran her hand over the blank paper. "I can draw?" "You can draw anything you want," Norma said. Then she opened the box with the gloves. She put them on. They were a little big, but she clapped her hands together. She looked at George. "Did Santa bring these?" "He dropped them off," George lied smoothly. "Said you might need 'em for riding." "Riding?" Her eyes went wide. "Well, you're on a ranch," George said. "Can't be on a ranch and not see a horse. After we clean up, I'll take you to the barn, introduce you to the old mare, Whiskey. She's gentle as a lamb, For 2 hours the world was perfect. There was no poverty, no abandonment, no fear. There was just paper wrapping being torn, the sound of the fire crackling, and the laughter of a child who was remembering how to be a child. George felt a peace he hadn't felt in years. He realized that lately Christmas had become a schedule, a list of obligations. This was raw. This was real. Then the sound came. It started as a low rumble in the distance, growing louder, the crunch of gravel. But this wasn't the slow, respectful approach of a neighbor. This was fast, aggressive. George stood up, walking to the window. 2 vehicles. One was a sheriff's department cruiser. The other was a grey sedan, the universal vehicle of government bureaucracy. "George?" Norma asked, her voice tight. "They're here," George said. He didn't sound scared. He sounded resigned. "Stay with her, Norma." "No," Norma said, standing up. "We do this together." Lily heard the tone. She dropped the colored pencil she was holding. She scrambled up, running to Norma and burying her face in Norma's skirt. "Is it the bad men? Is it Mama's boyfriend?" "No, honey," Norma said, stroking her hair with trembling hands. "It's just people who want to talk. You stay right here behind me." The doorbell didn't ring. There was a heavy, authoritative knock. George walked to the door. He checked his appearance in the mirror. He looked like a grandfather, but he straightened his spine, and suddenly he looked like the icon he was. He opened the door. Standing on the porch was Deputy Miller, a man George had known since he was a high school football player. Behind him was a woman in a stiff grey coat, holding a clipboard, her face pinched against the cold and against the situation. "Merry Christmas, George," Deputy Miller said, looking uncomfortable. He took off his hat. "Merry Christmas, Jim," George said, blocking the doorway with his frame. "Bit early for a social call, isn't it?" "It's not a social call, Mr. Straight." The woman stepped forward. Her voice was nasally and sharp. "I'm Ms. Halloway, Department of Family and Protective Services. We received a report of an unauthorized removal of a minor from the downtown area last night. A witness identified your truck." George looked at her. He didn't blink. "I removed a child from a freezing bench because your office didn't pick up the phone, Ms. Halloway." "That is not for you to decide," she snapped. "You have no legal guardianship. You have no foster license. Technically, sir, you have committed a felony, kidnapping. Now we know the child is here. We need you to step aside and release the minor into our custody immediately." "Custody?" George laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You mean the gymnasium? I called dispatch. They told me where she'd go. You want to take a 7-year-old girl from a warm house on Christmas morning and throw her on a mat in a gym? Protocol is protocol, Mr. Straight. Being a celebrity does not put you above the law." She tried to step around him. George didn't move his feet, but he shifted his weight. It was a subtle movement, but it was a wall. "I'm not claiming to be above the law, ma'am. I'm claiming to be a human being, which is something you seem to be struggling with right now." "Deputy!" Halloway shrieked. "Assist me!" Deputy Miller looked at George, then at the woman. "George, you know I have to. If you don't let us in, she'll get a warrant. It'll be a scene. The press will be here. Let them come." Norma's voice rang out from the living room. Norma walked into the foyer, Lily clinging to her leg like a barnacle. Norma looked like a queen in her cashmere sweater and pearls. She walked right up to the open door, standing next to her husband. "Ms. Halloway," Norma said, her voice icy calm. "Look at this child, look at her." She gently moved Lily slightly forward. Lily was trembling, tears streaming down her face, wearing the oversized flannel pajamas and clutching the stuffed horse. "She was abandoned," Norma said. "She was starving. She has signs of long-term neglect. We fed her, we bathed her, we gave her a Christmas. And you want to drag her out into the snow?" "I am doing my job," Halloway insisted, though her eyes flickered for a moment when she saw the terrified girl. "The mother has been located. She is in the hospital. The state assumes custody until the investigation is complete." "The mother is alive?" George asked, hope rising. "She is. Unconscious, but alive. Which makes this even more complicated. You have a child that isn't yours. Hand her over, now." Miss Halloway reached out a hand toward Lily. "Come here, child." Lily screamed. It was a high, piercing shriek of pure terror. She scrambled back, trying to hide inside Norma's sweater. "No! No, don't take me. I'll be good. I promise I'll be good." The sound echoed in the stone foyer. It hung in the air, silencing everyone. Deputy Miller looked at his boots. Even Ms. Halloway pulled her hand back, shocked by the visceral reaction. George stepped forward, closing the distance between him and the social worker. He towered over her. His blue eyes, usually so kind, were now hard as flint. "You hear that?" George said, his voice a low growl. "That is the sound of a system failure. You're not taking this girl out of this house today, not while I'm breathing." "Are you threatening a federal officer?" Halloway gasped. "No, ma'am," George said. "I'm making a promise. You have two choices. You can try to physically remove this child, in which case I will call every news station from here to New York and tell them that on Christmas Day, the state of Texas assaulted a terrified child in George Strait's living room. Or," he paused, looking at Norma. Norma nodded. She knew the play. "Alex," George continued, "you can come inside, you can drink some coffee, you can pull out your paperwork, and Norma and I will sign whatever emergency foster certification you have. We will take temporary custody, right here, right now. We have the background checks, we have the means, we have the governor on speed dial if you need a character reference." Halloway stared at him. She looked at the deputy. The deputy shrugged. "George is right, ma'am," Miller said quietly. "He's squeaky clean. If you take the girl, it's going to be a PR nightmare. If you leave her here, she's safe. And you get to go home to your family instead of filling out paperwork at the station all day." The social worker looked at Lily, who was peeking out from behind Norma's leg, her big blue eyes pleading. She looked at the warm fire crackling in the living room. She looked at the determination in George Strait's face. The rigid mask of bureaucracy began to crack. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I need to see the home environment," she muttered. "I need to inspect the sleeping quarters, and I need to run a background check, regardless of who you are." George stepped back and swept his arm toward the interior of the house. "Come on in," he said. "Coffee's hot." Norma didn't smile. She just squeezed Lily's shoulder. They had won the battle. But the war for Lily's future, and the mystery of her mother, was just beginning. The sound of a ballpoint pen scratching against paper was the loudest noise in the room. It was a sharp, jagged sound, like a scythe cutting through dry wheat. Ms. Halloway sat at the antique oak dining table, a cup of Norma's finest Colombian coffee untouched beside her. She was filling out the Emergency Placement Kinship and Safety Assessment form, a document designed for foster homes in the inner city, not for a sprawling ranch owned by a living legend. She paused at the section labeled Sleeping Arrangements, glancing up at the hallway that led to the blue room. "Private bedroom," she muttered, checking the box. "Heating and ventilation. Adequate. Fire safety. Adequate." George stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed. He watched the process with the patience of a predator, waiting for prey to make a mistake. He hadn't sat down. He wanted his height, his presence, to be a constant reminder that this was his territory. Norma sat next to Lily on the sofa, reading a book about horses, but her eyes never left the social worker's hand. Every check mark was a victory. Every pause was a threat. "Sign here, Mr. Straight, and here, Mrs. Straight. This grants you temporary emergency guardianship for a period of 72 hours, pending the family court hearing on Tuesday. It is highly irregular. If my supervisor finds out I did this without a precinct visit, I could be suspended." "You're doing the right thing," George said, his voice dropping an octave as he picked up the pen. "Sometimes the rule book doesn't cover the territory." He signed his name. That signature, which had graced millions of albums and contracts worth fortunes, now looked different. It was jagged, forceful. It was a signature of protection. Norma signed next to him, her hand elegant and steady. Halloway took the papers, tore off the yellow carbon copies and handed them to George. She stood up, buttoning her grey coat. She looked tired. The mask of the bureaucrat had slipped, revealing a woman who was overworked and underpaid, trying to manage a flood of misery with a teaspoon. "The mother," Halloway said, pausing at the door. "Her name is Sarah Miller. She was admitted to University Hospital last night as a Jane Doe. No ID. They identified her through fingerprints from a previous traffic violation. She's in the ICU." "What happened?" Norma asked, her voice soft. Collapse. Malnutrition and an untreated infection that went septic. She didn't abandon the child, Mrs. Straight. She fell. She was trying to walk to the free clinic on Elm Street when she went down. The ambulance took her, but the girl must have been hidden from view or scared and ran back to the bench. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. George felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had judged the situation. He had assumed addiction or negligence, but it was just poverty. Brutal, grinding poverty that had separated a mother from her child on Christmas Eve. Is she going to make it? George asked. Doctors say it's touch and go. If she wakes up, she's going to be frantic. I'll let the hospital know the child is safe. But don't get too attached. If the mother recovers, the state's goal is reunification. Holloway opened the door. The cold air rushed in. Merry Christmas, Mr. Straight. Merry Christmas, George replied. As the grey sedan and the police cruiser crunched away down the driveway, leaving the ranch in silence once more, George turned to Norma. The victory felt heavy now. They weren't just saving a child, they were holding the pieces of a broken family. The next 48 hours were a strange, suspended reality. The world outside the ranch gates continued to spin. The news cycle churned, but inside, time slowed down. Lily blossomed. It was terrifying how quickly a child could adapt to safety, as if she had been starving for it her whole life. She learned to feed the chickens. She rode in the tractor with George to check the fence lines. She sat in the kitchen while Norma baked pies, her face dusted with flour, laughing a sound that was becoming less rusty and more musical. But George couldn't shake the image of the mother, Sarah, lying in a hospital bed, alone. On the morning of the third day, George walked into the kitchen. He was dressed not in his ranch clothes, but in his city clothes, black jacket, crisp white shirt, the silver belly hat. Get her ready, George said to Norma. Norma looked up from her coffee. She knew. Is it time? I called the hospital. Sarah is awake. She's panicking. They had to sedate her because she was trying to rip out her IVs to go find Lily. We have to go. Lily didn't want to leave. When they told her they were going for a ride, she clung to the doorframe of the blue room. No, I want to stay. I want to stay with Bubba. George knelt down. This was the hardest part. The part where the cowboy has to be the bearer of hard truths. Lily, look at me. She looked, her eyes filling with tears. We aren't sending you away. We're taking you to see your mama. She's sick and she needs you. You're the medicine she needs. Lily stopped crying. Mama's okay? She's hurting, but seeing you will make her better, trust me. She nodded. I trust you, George. The drive to San Antonio was somber. The snow had melted into a dirty slush. The festive lights of Christmas were still up, but they looked tired in the daylight. They pulled up to the entrance of University Hospital. It was a place of sterile walls and the smell of antiseptic, the smell of crisis. George Straight walking into a public hospital caused a ripple. Heads turned. Nurses whispered. Phones were raised to snap blurry photos. George ignored them all. He walked with a singular purpose, flanked by Norma holding Lily's hand. They took the elevator to the ICU, room 404. George knocked gently on the glass door. Inside, a woman lay in the bed. She looked impossibly young and impossibly old at the same time. Her skin was grey, her cheeks sunken. Tubes ran into her arms, but her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling with a look of utter desolation. George opened the door. Sarah? The woman turned her head. It was a slow, painful movement. She saw the man in the cowboy hat. She didn't recognize him as a celebrity. She just saw a man. Then her gaze dropped. Lily! The scream was weak, raspy, but it tore through the room. Mama! Lily broke from Norma's grip. She didn't run. She scrambled. She threw herself against the side of the bed, burying her face in the sheets. Sarah tried to lift her arms, tangling the IV line, sobbing uncontrollably. She touched Lily's hair, her face checking for injuries, checking if she was real. I thought I lost you, Sarah wept. I woke up and you were gone. I thought I died and went to hell because you weren't there. George and Norma stood by the door, intruders in a sacred moment. Norma was crying silently. George swallowed hard, the lump in his throat feeling like a stone. This was the love that songs tried to capture but never quite could. The raw, animalistic bond of a mother who had nothing but her child. After a few minutes, the nurses came in to check the monitors, which were beeping frantically due to Sarah's elevated heart rate. George stepped forward. "Give them a minute," he ordered the nurse gently but firmly. Sarah looked up at him. Her eyes cleared. She saw the expensive suit, the hat, the way the nurses deferred to him. Fear replaced the relief. "Who are you?" she whispered, pulling Lily closer. "Did you take her? Are you CPS?" "No, Ma'am," George said, removing his hat. "My name is George. My wife Norma and we found Lily on the bench. We took her home. She's been safe. She's been fed. We just wanted to bring her back to you." Sarah stared at him. "George, straight?" "Yes, Ma'am." She looked at Norma, then at Lily. "You're the singer, the rich one." She looked down at her own hands, calloused and dirty against the white sheets. A shadow passed over her face. "You want to take her, don't you? You have a big house. You have money. You think I'm trash?" "No," Norma stepped in, her voice fierce. "We don't think that. We think you're a mother who hit a rough patch." "I have nothing," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "I lost my job at the diner because I missed a shift when she got sick. We lost the apartment 2 weeks ago. My car broke down. I have nothing to give her. Maybe—" She looked at Lily, who was tracing the veins on her mother's hand. "Maybe she should stay with you. You can give her a horse. I can't even give her a winter coat." It was the ultimate offer of surrender. A mother willing to break her own heart to save her child's future. George walked to the side of the bed. He placed his hand over Sarah's. "Sarah, listen to me. A horse is just an animal. A house is just wood and stone. Those things don't make a life. What you have, that grip she has on your hand, I can't buy that. No amount of money can buy that." He reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a check. It was a business card for a law firm and a handwritten note on his personal stationery. "I'm not going to take your daughter," George said, "but I am going to take your problems." Sarah looked confused. "I have a guest house on the ranch," George continued. "It's empty. It used to be for the foreman, but he retired. It's fully furnished. It has 2 bedrooms. It's yours, rent-free, for as long as you need it to get back on your feet." I can't pay you," Sarah stammered. "I didn't ask for payment. I need someone to help Norma in the greenhouse. She's been complaining about her back. It pays a living wage, full benefits, and there's a school bus that stops right at the main gate." Norma smiled. She hadn't known George was going to do this, but she wasn't surprised. It was the only solution that made sense. "You're offering me a job?" Sarah asked, disbelief washing over her. "I'm offering you a chance," George corrected, "to be the mother you want to be, without the world crushing you." Sarah looked at Lily. Then she looked at George. The tears started again, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of salvation. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" George put his hat back on. He looked out the window at the grey city. "Because it's Christmas," he said simply. "And because I saw a little girl on a bench and I remembered that we're all just one bad day away from being the ones sitting there." The story didn't stay quiet. It couldn't. By the time they left the hospital, the photos taken in the hallway had hit social media. By evening, the headline was everywhere: "King of Country's Christmas Miracle." The paparazzi were camped at the ranch gate the next morning. Helicopters buzzed overhead. The world wanted to consume the act of kindness, to turn it into content. They wanted interviews with the homeless mother. They wanted sound bites. George hated it. He valued his privacy above all else. But he saw an opportunity. He walked down to the gate alone. He didn't bring his guitar. He just stood there, leaning against the fence post, until the cameras stopped clicking and the reporters quieted down. "I'm going to say this once," George said, his voice projecting without a microphone. "There is a family inside this property recovering from a trauma. They are not a news story. They are people. If you want to help, stop taking pictures and start looking at your own communities. There are thousands of Lilies out there. There are thousands of Sarahs. They are in your towns, on your streets. Go find them. Help them. Leave us alone." He turned and walked back up the long, dusty driveway. The video of that speech went viral. It didn't just get likes, it got action. Donations poured into local shelters across Texas. The Lily effect became a phenomenon. People started carrying extra coats in their cars. They started looking at the invisible people on the benches. 6 months later, the Texas heat had returned, turning the hills a golden brown. The air shimmered with the song of cicadas. On the porch of the main house, George Strait sat in his rocking chair, a glass of iced tea in his hand. Down by the paddock he could see movement. A small figure was riding Whiskey, the old mare. She was sitting tall in the saddle, her hands holding the reins with confidence. Walking beside the horse was a woman. Sarah looked different now. Her hair was shiny, her skin tanned and healthy. She was laughing, pointing at a hawk circling overhead. Lily kicked the horse gently, urging it into a trot. She threw her head back, her laughter carrying on the wind all the way up to the porch. Norma stepped out of the house, the screen door slamming shut behind her. She stood next to George, resting her hand on his shoulder. "She's a natural," Norma said. "She's got good balance," George agreed. "She'll be barrel racing by next summer." "You saved them, George." George took a sip of his tea. He shook his head slowly. "No, Norma. I think they saved us. This house, it was getting a little too quiet, a little too full of memories and not enough life. We needed them just as much." He looked out at the horizon. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in streaks of purple and orange. The dusty road stretched out before them, winding through the mesquite and the cactus, the same road that had led him to fame and the same road that had led him home. He picked up his guitar, which was leaning against the chair. He didn't play a hit song. He just strummed a G chord, letting it ring out into the evening air. It was a sound of contentment, a sound of redemption. The world was big, and it was often cruel. But on this patch of dirt, under this endless sky, things were right. The cowboy had done his job, not with a gun or a lasso or a song, but with a hand extended in the dark. George watched the little girl ride toward the sunset, and for the first time in a long time, the king of country didn't feel the need to say a word. The music of the moment was enough.